Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's class on flower fundamentals, drawing hydrangea flowers. I am your instructor, Adrienne Hodge, and I know we have a lot of new faces tonight, so welcome. This class had a very huge sign-up list. I know people are really excited to draw some flowers, and we've done a few other classes like this on flower fundamentals, mostly last summer, and there was drawing roses, we did orchid flowers and datura flowers. And then in the last one, which I believe was the orchid flower class, which was several months back, I had asked what flower folks wanted me to do next, and we took a little poll in the chat that night, and a lot of people voted for hydrangeas, so which are one of my favorite flowers to buy myself. So I bought some a couple months ago when I was planning this class and took some reference photos, which I shared with you in the supply list, and we'll be breaking down just like we did in all of those other flower fundamental classes. We'll kind of be creating a page of notes based on this particular flower, and we'll be really zooming in and taking it piece by piece and also as a whole, and really looking at its form, its contour lines, the value involved, and also kind of creating a diagram of it so that we can think about just how to approach it in a way that feels like we can master it and not like it's mastering us, because flowers can be very tricky, and sometimes it's really easy to get sucked into the details of them, or either focus on the details or the whole and not slow down and really notice either one of those things, if you're trying to draw the whole thing too quickly, or if you're just focusing on the details and not capturing the essence of it. So we'll cover all that stuff tonight, and then next week we'll be drawing flowers in a vase, and it's the same flowers. It's hydrangea flowers in a vase, but since it's only an hour, I really wanted that class to be more focused on the interaction of the flowers in the vase and the vase itself, and how like the stalks go down into the water inside of a clear glass vase, and like the leaves and just the entire composition of the flowers in the vase. And then obviously we're going to draw some of the hydrangeas, but I left that sketch and that demo a little unfinished, since we have this class that will really help you to complete that drawing of the hydrangeas in the vase if you have the time and the dedication to work on that. Okay, so that's next week, but tonight is just the results of tonight's class will be something similar to this. Switch to my tabletop view. So you'll probably have like a page of notes, and results may vary depending on where you are in your drawing skills. But we're just going to break it down, and then we're really going to zoom in on certain aspects of it and really get into it. Okay, so we'll be using, or I'm going to be using these Faber-Castell pencils that come in this little set of 6. You're welcome to use any pencils that you have handy. I've got a Faber-Castell dust-free eraser. You can use any eraser you have handy. I've got let me see, which sketchbook is this? It's the Canson 9x12. I've got it flipped upside down because I'm left-handed to get that spiral on the right side. But yeah, any sketchbook that you have handy works, and these supplies were all purchased at Michael's. Don't forget to tag your work with those hashtags, Make It With Michael's or Michael's Classes, and you can follow me on Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art. And Chanel has my link tree that she can drop in the chat for you as well. I am very open these days, especially during the day and the mornings, and I am taking private lesson students. So if you really like my teaching style and would like to do a more dedicated practice or goal-focused Zoom classes with me, private lessons, I offer those, and you can sign up through my Linktree for a free 15-minute consultation on private lessons. You can even go ahead and just book a 60-minute session with me because I have it linked to my Google Calendar. So you can find that through my Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art. That's the link in my bio. When you click on my profile, it'll be the little Linktree link that's there. If you're watching this later on YouTube, that's where you can find me and that information. Here's a couple of my business cards with some of my professional work using calligraphy ink. I'm also on Facebook, Adrienne Hodge Fine Art. Okay. So those reference photos that I included looked like this. I'm going to be using them on the iPad tonight. So we've got this reference photo, and then yeah, this one that really zooms in on the individual petals a little bit more. Or actually, this one really zooms in more on the petals. And this is the one that zooms out a little bit more. And then we've got the photo of the flowers in the vase that we'll be using next week. But tonight we're just going to focus on these two where we're very zoomed in. Any questions about supplies or any of that before we get rolling?
The only question we have is about the pencils you're using, but I assume you're going to go over supplies here in a second.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, that's always the number one question that gets asked the most in all of these classes is what pencil am I going to be using? So this particular set comes with just an HB, a B, and then a 2B, 4B, 6B, and 8B. I'm going to be using this set so that I can get some heavier, softer lines on the Zoom screen. I'll be using the heavier B pencils in this set. If you have this exact same set with you, then I would use the HB or the B pencil, keep it on the lighter side. And if you have some H pencils, then I would use those as well. If you're struggling to just get, your baselines down, because drawing lightly with an H pencil is going to make it easier to erase. And I only use heavier pencils on screen so that they show up on the Zoom, because even this drawing, I can see it's not showing up quite as dark as my lines are on the Zoom screen for me right now. And I know it's like that for a lot of people. So I've watched several other art instructors who teach with graphite on YouTube, and they all have that same struggle. It's just the struggle of teaching on Zoom. I'm going to have to use a darker pencil than I would like to use if I were not drawing on Zoom. Okay, so I'm going to use more like a 2B, or maybe even in my 4B, so that those lines are showing up nice and dark. And then for the heavier lines, I'll use the 6B or the 8B. But I probably used the B and the HB the most when I was just getting the initial sketching down. Okay, so let's start with our little diagram here and just break it down, because there's a lot going on with hydrangeas. And I just realized we actually do need the picture of the flowers in the vase so that we can talk about the just one moment. That was the one photo as I was preparing. I did not send that one to my iPad because I thought we're just focusing on the zoomed in. And then I just realized we do need to look at the shape that they create as a whole, those little bundles that they create. So let me just get those over on the iPad real quick.
Hey, Adrian, we're getting a couple of questions about the pencils. Can you explain briefly what the difference is in drawing with different numbers?
Sure. Yeah, I definitely can do that. I'll just do a very quick version of that. And then if you want more information on that, that was covered in our very first class. It's probably the class I refer back to the most. I've been thinking about doing like revisiting that in a new way. So you've got this spectrum from H to B, and so we've got the H side and we've got the B side. And then right in the middle, we have an HB pencil, which is like a number 2 pencil. The H stands for hard. The B stands for black. But I like to say the B stands for butter because it's soft like butter. So it's really soft and hard. So what's happening is as those numbers are getting higher on the H side, the pencils are, so like we've got a 2H, 4H. In this set that I put on the supply list, we only have the HB, the number 2 pencil, but typically you'll have, 4H, 2H, maybe 5H, 6H, etc. As those numbers are getting higher, what's happening is the pencil is getting harder, it's getting lighter. And so it has more binders added to the pencil and less graphite. On the graphite side, or on the B side, I'm sorry, are all graphite. Those numbers, as they're getting higher, what's happening is you've got less binders and more graphite in them. So as the numbers go up, the pencil is getting softer, it's getting darker, it's getting more like butter. So when you're drawing with an H pencil, what happens a lot of time is people will hold the pencil like this, perpendicular to the paper, like they're writing, and they'll press down really hard and it will dig into the paper and it will be really hard for them to erase their lines. So if I was drawing this out, and this is what I do in that very first class, I have everybody write their name. So like that's a nickname that I go by, 80, and then try to erase that line with their eraser, or erase their name. And when you write it like that and just like, oh, hang on, I did it with a B pencil, so it kind of didn't do it as much. Let me get my HB pencil and do it for emphasis. So if I use an H pencil or even an HB and I write my name like that, and I really put a lot of pressure and I dig it in there, then when I go to erase that, it's not going to go away. It's going to be there no matter what I do. We're going to see the ghost line of it, right? So the opposite of that is to hold the pencil towards the back, hold it parallel to the paper, and put very little pressure on it. So then you're making lines that are so light, they're not even showing up on the Zoom right now, but I just wrote my name again right there. And when I erase that, it's just sitting on the surface of the paper, so it goes completely away. So these H pencils are not meant, they're, I like to say it's as if we've all been using a trombone our entire lives for a utilitarian purpose, and then now we're trying to make art with them and we're just holding it wrong. These pencils were not meant to be writing utensils. They're different pencils for a reason, and they have different purposes. So these lighter H pencils were meant to do your like foundational lines. Like if I try to draw a perfect circle the first time, it's going to be really tricky. But it's not going to be perfect the first time. But if I keep circling around super light like that, eventually I will have something that feels like a perfect circle, and then I can erase everything that I don't want to be there, or I can take my heavier B pencil and go over my lines now that I've found that shape that I'm looking for. So it's just a much more successful way to set yourself up to draw if you're, understanding how to use those H and B pencils. Okay, that's the first time I've ever like actually redone the spiel. We get that question all the time, so maybe it's time to do a redo. But Chanel can probably find the link to that class and drop it if she doesn't already have it. It was called Intro to Graphite and Drawing Forms, and we even redid it early in the series 2 years ago. Okay, so back to tonight's class on hydrangeas. So I'm going to start with this shape right here that I'm seeing, and then we'll talk about this overall shape that we're seeing. And yeah, I just see somebody answered in the chat that F stands for fine, which those don't come in every set of pencils, but they're closer to like an HB or an H than they are the B. They're kind of there in the middle of that spectrum. So they have a fine point. Okay, so we've got this like big round bulbous shape that a lot of when all these, you know, how the hydrangeas come on a bush, they kind of all bush together in this little bundle, which is really cute, right? And they're very round. So that's this shape that I drew down here, and we're going to map that out and talk about the contour lines there. And if you're unfamiliar with contour lines, that very first class on Intro to Graphite and Drawing Forms talks all about contour lines as well. And I use that a lot to map out and kind of diagram everything that we're drawing, because value lines and value shapes and contour lines are the two things that I lean on the most. All right, so let's get in here with the center of the flower first and just start this little diagram. A lot of flowers have, wow, I wrote my name so hard on that last piece of paper. I can see like the faintest indentation of it on the page behind, and even that next one. Don't try this at home. Okay, so a lot of flowers have a very similar kind of spiral thing happening in the middle, like a pinwheel. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to start with this shape that I'm seeing in the center. And it feels like almost another, like a button or another little flower in the center there. And it's got an X through it, which is interesting. So it's like little pie pieces or triangles that create this little X on a button. Okay, so we'll draw our little button first with the X, and let's just really make it nice and dark, and we're just going to exaggerate it for emphasis here. And then we're going to notice how there is this pinwheel of petals that seem to flow in a certain direction, like counterclockwise. That's how I'm reading it, is a pinwheel like that of these petals that overlap each other. Okay, so that's the first thing we're going to notice, is that little pinwheel shape. And then within that pinwheel shape, I want us to notice this bit of like a spider web that's happening, and the contours that are happening inside of that, and how from that button, how it creates like in this one, it's very obvious how it kind of creates like a bit of like a star or spider webby thing is happening. So we're going to draw this kind of like a comic book POW thing. It feels very much like a spider web, and it's following the pinwheel flow, the flow of information in that pinwheel. And then it doesn't necessarily, it kind of feels like a scoop. It feels like it scoops down in some way. So, you know, kind of like a spider web has this like scoopy thing that's happening. Like it's dipping down in elevation depending on where the spider web is. So it's, I don't know if y'all are seeing that, but that's how I'm reading this inner part of the flower. And I am definitely not going to be using official flower terms here. Okay, but in the center of the flower, in these blooms, we've got that shape. And then from that, I'm just noticing how the other axis, the horizontal axis, is spiraling as well. So we've got the information stacked in a way that the petals are overlapping in this counterclockwise pinwheel. And then we've got this like, you know, cup at the center, like the bottom of a cup that is, the elevation is starting to rise into these petals. Okay, so we could kind of start to finish that by having the elevation start to rise in that direction, but it's also continuing in that spiral flow as it goes. So that's the first thing we're going to notice with our diagram. And then the next thing I want to look at is just the petals themselves and what the value is doing within those petals and the shapes of the value that I'm seeing. And I feel like this shape shows up quite a bit. It feels like a triangle that has sides that are curved in on all angles, and then maybe like a ice cream cone a little bit at the top. So whenever I'm looking at where, because then there's this shift in elevation, it's like we've got the bottom of a cup. I'm going to use my hand to like show like this cup, but then all of a sudden the elevation like goes straight up in some places, and the petals, you know, we see them more like from a side view because the elevation comes like straight up on some of them, which is interesting. They really do have the way that the petals are stacked on top of each other is, you know, when I've been studying like different flowers in these classes, like hydrangeas really do follow an interesting path. And as we go forward, you know, y'all feel free to tell me what flower you want me to do next. I'm very open to suggestions. In fact, we can start in the chat right now. If you have a flower you really want me to do next, let me know. And at the end, we can see which flower showed up the most. I've already done rose, datura, and orchids. So, and I would say orchids, you know, they seem like they might be similar to this, but yeah, how some of the petals just like go straight up and then other ones do like a scoopy thing. Okay, so anyway, when the elevation goes straight up, we see just like the bottom of it kind of like a fan, and then we see the top ridge of it like this. So I drew that with a dotted line. So we'll just draw that part of the flower, and then and so we're just noticing how they're overlapping. And I was mostly looking at this one when I drew that diagram. I can just tell by glancing at it. But then some of them, they feel like clamshells. So there's a lot of different ways that they stack up. But I would say that most of them either have that clamshell feel to them, or they feel sort of like orchids in a way, but not. But they're more like a buttercup, like they're more flattened out. So yeah, they feel maybe like a cross between a buttercup and a clamshell shape. All right, so let's go.
I have a couple questions for you.
Okay.
The first one is, what do you mean by elevation?
Oh, okay, that's a good question. So on a elevational map, like if I were looking at a mountain, I'm talking about contour lines in regards to elevation. If we were looking at a mountain like this, it wouldn't be like a perfect cone. There would be some like irregular ridges happening, right? But if there was like a road on this mountain, you might see it kind of traveling like down the side of a drill or a cone, right? So that's describing the shift in elevation. And then down the side of the mountain, you might have some other cliff faces, the vertical axis looking something like that. So all of these contour lines are describing the elevation of a mountain, and that's easy to think about on a mountain because we think about land in terms of elevation and this being higher and lower, but I'm talking about the elevation of the flower. So the inner part of the flower is at a lower elevation than these petals that are pointed straight up at us. So if I'm looking at this is like the mountain peak. So I'm just trying to get you to see the shapes that are happening as they're coming up higher right there. So I'm seeing this shape. I'm seeing this kind of triangular shape, and I'm seeing that same shape repeated quite a bit. So I'm just going to draw that again for us. So I'm seeing a lot of this shape repeated. And then on top of that, I'm kind of drawing I used a dotted line to try to distinguish what was like this part of the flower that's pointed straight up at us so that we could separate what we're seeing there from the rest of it. But then that happens a couple of times because there's another one, like right here, there's another petal that comes up and overlaps right there on top of it. That's not exactly how it looks, but it's something like that. And then we've got the ones that make like this kind of oar shape, or more like, you know, a leaf petal. And all of those are overlapping each other. So we've got the ones that are shaped kind of like this, like a big paddle or a big leaf, or some of them are a little more rounded and they overlap like this. And then we've got some of them that are sticking straight up. And then within that, we've got the button at the center. And then we've got that shift and elevation. So I'm not going to draw the diagram every time, but this is kind of the overall diagram of one little bloom within that. And then we could, you know, just fill that in and with a straight line, and it would feel really flat just to notice, you know, that overall shape. But then if we want to really describe the shift in elevation, then we need to start to do something like this. So we're going to really get in here and start to draw the shift in elevation. So we're going to zoom in on the center of the flower, and we'll see how far we can get in the next 10 minutes or so drawing something like this. And then we'll talk about the overall shape that a bundle of hydrangeas has. And then, yeah, I just broke down the petals even more right here just to show the different ways that the petals appear. So I'll just make these lines a little darker instead of drawing it again. So just to save time, I'll do this now and then we'll zoom in. So I'm seeing some that are like this, that are just nice and curved, like an oval sticking out. Some of them have more of this shape, like maybe a rose petal might appear. And then some of them have a very rounded shape, more like that. So those are the different ways that the petals show up. And then whenever we look at the bundles as a whole, sometimes we're seeing these kind of little half moon shapes because we're seeing the way that they create like that clamshell shape. So when they are closed a little bit, when we can't see into the center of them, like here, when we're looking at this one that's more zoomed out, see how there's like some that are nice and round, some that are really round, and then some that overlap and they feel kind of like a butterfly or a clamshell. Okay. So hopefully y'all are with me and seeing all those different shapes that the hydrangea petals take on, the blooms take on. Okay. And then also we've got some of these like little round moments on the stalks where they stick up. So that's what I was drawing right here, was like the little circle shape that you see on some of the stalks, like right here. Okay. So back to our diagram page. Okay, so let's really get in here and look at one of these blooms. So this one is the one that I feel like has grabs my attention the most in that photograph. But like we can see back here how, yeah, there's one where it really feels like a butterfly or a clamshell closing. But then within that, we can still see all of this happening. So if you wanted to really have a hyper realistic drawing of hydrangea bloom up close, then you would want to really get in here and notice all this stuff. So I'm just going to zoom in on the center here. So this is that button, and we want it to be, it's kind of like a couch cushion button, how they're like really rounded, and then the thread is like inside of the couch cushion button. So that's how I'm reading that. It's very rounded itself. Like I could even put the contours of that and emphasize how curved and rounded all of the contours of that center button shape is. Okay, and then here's that little cone shape that I'm seeing coming up right here. And then I see another one, and it's following that pinwheel that we talked about. And then it's being overlapped by this big petal. Okay, and then I can see the veins on this petal, like a tongue. We've got these lines happening right here. So I'm sketching in a few of those. And then we've got the value shapes. So the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the light. And if you're just completely new to drawing and don't know the value term, I don't want to keep pausing the class to, you know, go over all these concepts, but we've had tons of classes on value, and you can go back to, you know, that very first class on Intro to Graphite and Drawing Forms. It also talks about value shapes, and then the next class was on tonal shading with and without a ground, like using a ground to create tonal shading. But so I've just filled in the shape of a shadow that I'm seeing right here, this little shape that's being cast on the other petal. And then I'm using the side of my pencil to fill in some nice soft tonal shading, which is just smooth, continuous, blended shading, and getting it nice and dark there. And we talk about value on a 0 to 10 value scale, 10 being our absolute black and 0 being the absolute white light. So we can go pretty dark with where those shadows are being cast in a really dark way. Okay, and then I've drawn this petal, which is being overlapped by this one as well. And then all of these petals, well, here, let me get this one in here as well. So this is the one that's like pointed straight up at us. So we're getting what's called foreshortening here. So foreshortening is where information is missing and our eyes kind of, you know, short circuit a little bit when we're drawing foreshortening. So let's say, you know, we're looking at a finger and a finger is nice and long, but then if that finger is pointed directly at us, all we see is this shape at the tip of the finger. And then we might see a little bit, you know, here. And so the temptation is to draw all this missing information and not draw just what we're seeing. So we know this petal is much bigger than this and would stretch out a lot farther, but all we can see is this shape along the top of it. And it's not that dark. I only made it darker so that my lines for it would show up on the camera. And then in between that, we're seeing a little space of a shadow in between. And then we're seeing another top of a petal that's sticking up right there. So they're extremely foreshortened. And then we've got this elevation happening. So we've got these contours that are curving up in a way to guide us. And I would say if you're just really lost, the hydrangea is, you know, certain flowers are trickier to draw than others. Maybe check out those other flower fundamental classes on drawing a rose or the datura flower. Even though the datura feels complicated, I feel like mapping out and diagramming those flowers are definitely easier concepts to grasp if you're having a harder time with this one, just because those flowers are laid out in a more of a predictable diagram. And the hydrangea blooms, they take on some very unpredictable shapes, you know, like what's going on looking over here like a butterfly and a clamshell and then a rose a little bit. It's very confusing. Okay, so I'm just drawing the contours at the center, and then I'm doing some cross contour lines to show how that elevation is like doing like a bottom of a bowl or a scoop here. So all of this is just to train your brain to see these contours, because the first, you know, challenge is just seeing them. Some people, you know, have a really hard time just looking and slowing down and seeing these shapes and these forms. So taking your time to look at them is important. Just, you know, that's your homework. If this is really breaking your brain, is to just really look at a flower. And then if you follow along right now and draw these shapes, these lines that I'm drawing are describing what's happening there. So here's this shape again. We got another one of these sort of things that feel like a cone, or like maybe a volcano or something for this other big petal that's scooping out right here. That feels like a stingray shape. And I find calling shapes something other than what they are just makes them easier to draw sometimes. And then I'm looking at the veins, those little lines that I see to kind of help guide me and understand what's happening with the elevation. And also some of the value, the shadows that are being cast across this petal are really following what's happening in the veins of the flower. So there's this big shadowy shape right here, but also it appears to curve over right there. It appears like the elevation is like curving up in that direction. So see how when I curved my lines in a different way, it makes it feel like the elevation is going up versus down. So the directional flow of those contour lines really help describe, you know, the elevation. That's the best word I have for it. The contours, but elevation, I think, is something we can all relate to. Contours is more of an art term or a makeup term, like contouring, you know, your face makeup. Okay, so then we're going to use some more tonal shading on using the side of our B pencil. And I've got my 6B here in my hand. So I'm going super dark so it shows up on Zoom. But you can use, you know, obviously a lighter pencil to sketch all of this. I'm just filling in this value that I'm seeing on the side of my B pencil. Okay, and then in the center here around the button, there's some value on, I don't know what that's called. I mean, I know we have like the pistil in the center of a lot of flowers. I'm not sure what this thing I'm reading as a button is called at the center of the hydrangea flower. But there's a lot of value that's happening in a way that feels like that kind of star diagram that we created. So as we're filling in this value, this shadow, we're following those contours that we just drew. So they're kind of like little training wheels for knowing where to put the value and where your pencil lines should, you know, kind of follow that directional flow that we just described. And the value is all going to go in a way that feels like that star pattern that we drew a moment ago when we were creating a diagram. So I'm starting to connect the dots here. I know it seemed like, where is she going with this 15 minutes ago? Now we're pulling it all together. Hopefully it makes sense why I drew all those lines and why I'm doing what I'm doing. Okay, and then in some places it's a darker value closer to that button. So I'm putting more pressure on my pencil for those darker values. All right, and we could keep going with this and we could just, you know, end up with a really cool hyper realistic drawing of a hydrangea bloom or a bunch of them if we did them all this way. But I want to talk about the spaces in between them real quick, and then we'll talk about the whole you know, pile of blooms and that shape and form that's being created. But this is really going to lead into next week's class when we start to draw the whole thing in that vase. Let me just go back to the picture of the flowers in the vase for a second. So see what really stands out to me when I look at this picture of the entire, you know, blooms in the vase. My eyes go to the darkest darks and the lightest lights. And so these little keyhole spaces in between the blooms, those shapes that are happening, we're going to really focus on that negative space and those shapes next week as we draw the flowers in the vase. And I can pull up my drawing for that class next week in just a moment and show you, you know, how that looks in the drawing form, but we'll, you know, obviously do that next week and really get into it. But also there's like those little crescent moon shapes that are showing up for me a lot. Some little crescent moons of light. There's those little soft triangle shapes, like the little side view of where it curves up. There's a lot of those. And then there's a lot of like what feels like a butterfly when it's got its wings closed and the petals are kind of stacked on top of each other. So let's go back to our zoomed in version and see what I'm talking about. So like my eyes just got a little lost for a second. Oh yeah, this one, that was the one I was looking at. It feels like an hourglass right here, this little shape in between. So that's happening right here at the edge of this one that I described like a stingray. So if I start to draw the petal of the bloom next to it, I have to really draw like 3 or 4 petals. So when I was in the flower fundamentals class about roses, I talked about this a little bit as well, how it's really hard to just draw one petal of a rose because it kind of looks like confusing. Like, what am I looking at? It's not until you stack all those petals on top of each other that it starts to be clear what you're looking at. So it's kind of hard to draw this negative space without also drawing a little bit of these other shapes. So like there's the crescent moon shape that I'm seeing, right? In the way that those are overlapping. Right here, I'm seeing kind of a crescent moon shape. And then I just drew this one, but then look, the shadow that's being cast from one petal to another, it's another little crescent moon. So I'm just going one shape at a time. This is that negative space, that little keyhole shape. And when I zoom out, that's what's jumping out at me is the crescent moons and these little hourglasses and these little soft triangle shapes. Okay, so when we draw the flowers in the vase, we're going to really be focusing more on those and implying the flower, you know, zoomed out. Because when we're zoomed out away from it, you're not seeing this. You know, this is, you got to get really close to it to see what we're doing here. So we're mostly going to be looking at these shapes next week. And just wanted to spend some time on that so that I could, you know, be able to like throw back to this class next week and say, go check that out if, you know, that's not making sense, because we're going to spend a lot of time next week focusing on like this area of the vase and we only have an hour. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the hydrangeas next week because we're doing it this week. Okay, so let's talk about the blooms as a whole, which will also help us next week. Okay, so we're looking at this shape, which is actually a form because a shape is a two-dimensional thing. So, but let's go ahead and draw the two-dimensional shape that we would start with. So the two-dimensional shape that I'm seeing to start with is like an oval. It's not a perfect oval. It's kind of like a piece of ciabatta bread, maybe. Like it's kind of like that, because then at some point it just starts turning into like the leaves and everything. So that's the one that's turned on its side. Here, let me draw another one over here. So it's like a bun, like a bun. Okay, so this is all leaves. We're not worried about the leaves. We're going to spend lots of time on the leaves next week. So I just want to talk about the overall bulbous shape. Kind of wish I had some hydrangeas. I've got lots of dried ones, dead ones. I've got some dead ones right here. I'm going to actually grab one real quick. Okay, so like this is probably 3 or 4 different bundles, you know, because they're dried. But yeah, there's like the bottom of it where it kind of flattens out, and then it's like the round bulbous part. Okay, so that's what I drew right here. So, and I kind of drew it from a different angle. So we've got like the leaves underneath it. You can go ahead and draw the leaves underneath it. Just do some very cartoonish leaves just to anchor us down right there. And I just want to think about that whole shape. If I had some fresh ones, that would make more sense, but you'll know what hydrangeas look like. Okay. So we're thinking of it like as a sphere, even though it's not a perfect sphere. If we were drawing a sphere, we would start with a circle, and then we would try to make that circle feel three-dimensional by lots of curved lines. And we would want all of our lines to curve. I like to start with like a olive pit feeling in the center. And then my circle got away from me a little bit. Let me redraw it. And then maybe I would do another little hurricane eye or olive pit over here, and then do it again. I want all my lines to curve. So I'm describing that you're looking at something round on all levels, right? And the more I curve and round my lines, the more I'm convincing you, the viewer, who are looking at this optical illusion that I've created on the page, that you're looking at something really rounded, right? It's like a rubber band ball. The more you keep wrapping those rubber bands around it, the bigger and bigger it gets, right? So that's how we're describing a sphere, but this is not a perfect sphere, the bulbous shape that's being created. So we can go ahead and put like an eye in the center up here, and then think about the whole shape that the bundle is being created, kind of like a cinnamon roll. Yeah, it is like a cinnamon roll. Okay, and then out from the center of that, and I'll draw my lines a little darker so they show up. Just wanted to make sure I had it first. Okay, so we've got that on the horizontal axis, and then on the vertical axis, I'm reading the entire bundle as all being connected like that. So that's a very perfect, you know, kind of like I'm forcing all those hydrangeas to come together in a way that feels like that. But then if we start to draw our little crescent moons and our little, you know, our little petal shapes within there, let's pull up that photo of the the flowers in the vase, and start to look at those little keyhole shapes, those little crescent moons, and like get a little bit of crescent moon shapes to happen all the way around here. Now we're getting somewhere. Now we're starting to feel like a hydrangea bundle. And get some little clamshells and some butterfly. I mean, I'm just doing a very quick kind of imagined version of a lot of them, but hopefully y'all are getting the idea, right? That's kind of the overall shape that the hydrangea bundle is creating. Very stylized, cartoonish version of it. But next week, you know, we'll break it down a little bit more and look at those spaces in between as we build. But I just want to, since we only have an hour next week to get the whole vase, I wanted to make sure I broke that down a little bit this week so that I could refer back to this and have something helpful for us to build on. And hopefully you will all join me next week, and everybody in class next week will have seen this video, so nobody will be lost. But I know that's not how it's going to be. So, but still. Okay, so we've got about 7 minutes left, which is, I'm amazed I covered all that, even with the little bit of a late start that we got talking about just the H&B pencils a little bit. Pardon the sound of my cat eating her food out of her bowl, if you're wondering what that sound is. It like shakes back and forth. I've seen people in the chat. It's like the cat always has to come eat during my Michael's class. And people have been like, well, what's that hammering sound in the background? That's what it is. Okay. And yeah, next week we also will talk about this negative space that's happening like in between some of these as well, like these fun shapes a little bit. Okay, any yeah, cat ASMR. I love it, Annabelle. Anybody have any questions or like requests of something that you want me to repeat or go back to before we end the class, since we have a couple extra minutes right now? I just popped the chat open so I can see. Okay, someone said to go back to the hourglass. Okay, that's great. So yeah, the hourglass shape was, it's not always an hourglass, but I do see it in a few different spots. So I'm just talking about the shadows that are cast by the petals in between the petals as they're overlapping. So like I'm seeing a bit of an hourglass shape. I mean, it's not a perfect hourglass, but I'm just seeing what feels like an hourglass to me right there, right there. It's not, you know, everywhere, and it's not perfectly that shape everywhere. That was just the one that I honed in on right there. But the triangle shape in between the petals does show up quite a bit. So that's all I was referring to with that, was just next week when we do more of an implied line version of the hydrangea flowers in the vase. Actually, now would be a good time to just show you my sketch of the flowers in the vase that we're going to be working on next week. Give me 1 second to find it in my sketchbook. Oh, right to it. Okay. So we're going to be really focusing on the interaction between the flowers and the vase themselves, and really focusing on the leaves quite a bit. So, you know, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on the hydrangeas. We're more going to do an implied line. We're going to not draw them. We're going to draw the overall kind of shape that the bundle's creating, like that kind of cotton candy cinnamon roll pile of blooms. And then we're going to get in there and really, I'm like, I want to zoom in on my drawing, and we're going to look at those little keyhole spaces of value, because the shadows are what, you know, are going to imply the blooms. We're not going to draw the blooms. We're going to draw the space in between the blooms. But with this class, we're going to have a great understanding of, you know, what's going on within each bloom now, but we're more going to draw those little keyhole spaces that are happening in between. And we're going to spend a lot of time on the leaves and the vase. I wanted this class to be something that could translate to any flowers in a vase because, you know, the focus has been so much on the flowers, but what if the flowers are in a vase, right? You want to be able to draw the transitional moment between the flowers and the vase. So, because as a whole, you know, when I look at hydrangeas, I don't see these blooms. I don't know about y'all, but I've never really looked this closely at hydrangeas. If you told me to just draw hydrangeas from my imagination, I would probably draw, you know, like the pile of, you know, a bundle. I wouldn't draw everything that we just did. But now we know because we've zoomed in and we've looked at them. Okay, hopefully that was some good extra stuff there. I'm going to switch back to my forward-facing camera, and I'd love to see some of your pages of notes if you'd like to hold them up, and I can see what you worked on tonight. Chanel can spotlight you. Oh, look at that, Marty. Yes. Oh, you really got that foreshortened petal coming towards me. That's gorgeous. Wonderful. You got it. Love it when I see that. It's like, all right, I did my job. Yes, that's lovely. And I love the bundle, Monica. Very nice. And you got that little button. It's very convincing hydrangea bloom. Hi, Sarah. Oh, look at that. Oh, I just love when we have folks who just keep coming back, just seeing how you develop your skills every time. You're getting so good, Sarah. I mean, you've been good for a while, but that's so nice. Really love those soft lines. Look at that. Grace. Yeah, you really convinced me the inner, you know, what's happening with those contours on the inside. Oh, we've got some very young artists here. Nice. Yes, wonderful. Oh, great job, y'all. Really impressive. And look at that. Ria, that's a beautiful bundle. Very convincing hydrangea bundle there. Oh, and I love those soft lines, Jan. Yes. Oh, I really feel like I did my job because you all rendered these hydrangea blooms and bundles so beautifully. And Barbara, same thing. I feel that overlapping. Thank you, Leslie. All right. The classes are all on Wednesday evenings, the live classes. Next Wednesday will be the flowers in a vase. All right, I'm seeing that hourglass and those crescent moon shapes there. Yeah, I'm feeling the depths and the contours on all of these. Very nice. Misha. Oh, I love your notes too. I just love a page of notes. I don't know about y'all, but a page of notes with all these little sketches is so satisfying to me. Yeah, really lovely. Oh, yeah, it kind of feels like a hibiscus flower. That's what I was trying to say earlier. And this one reminds me how it does have the shape of a hibiscus. Thank you, Kelly. What was the consensus in the chat, Chanel? Did you see the name of like one flower popping up a lot? Do we feel like there was a lot of votes for anything?
Excuse me, give me 1 second. I wrote down quite a few.
Oh, thank you for doing that. And that last one that just held up the iPad too, that was a great example as well. But yeah, let's see what was, y'all are my best resource when I'm like, what do I do next? What do the people want? I saw like poppies. Oh yeah, tell me.
Yeah, poppies was a big one.
Okay.
Lilies, chrysanthemums, dandelions.
Okay. Oh, I'd love to do a dandelion class. Chrysanthemums.
And I think sunflowers was the other one I saw there multiple times.
Well, you'll be happy because we've got gouache sunflower coming up at the end of the month. We're not going to break it down quite as much like the flower fundamentals, so maybe I can still do another, you know, deep dive into sunflowers, but we will be doing sunflowers in a gouache painting at the end of the month, or part 1 at the end of the month, and then continued in September. Okay, cool. Yeah, dandelions are one I've been thinking of myself, so maybe that'll be the next one. But since poppies, I think, were even requested the last time, maybe I'll do that too. But you know, I got to sprinkle it in with like figures. I got those model references that I collected recently, so we gotta like go back and forth. But I'll come back to the flower fundamentals and revisit these and take your suggestions to heart. So thank you all so much, and I'll see you next week, hopefully, for drawing the flowers in a vase. Have a great night. Thank you, Chanel. Good night.